ever try to solve something like really complicated and you just start like thinking out loud?
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden you can actually figure it out, right?
Huh.
Like you're not just thinking, you're like reasoning.
Yeah.
Well, get this, today's deep dive, it's all about how researchers are like using that exact idea
Well,
to make AI smarter, and it's this technique called chain of thought prompting.
yeah, it's like a total game changer. I mean, for the longest time, large language models, even the really huge ones, they just couldn't quite grasp that whole multi-step reasoning thing,
Okay.
Like we'd feed them tons of data and they'd spit out answers, but actually understanding how they got there, that was a whole other story. It was basically a black box. But chain of thought prompting, that's different.
Okay, so like break this down for me. We've got this research paper, right? And it's explaining how this all works.
Yeah.
So are you saying instead of just giving the AI a problem and the answer, we like give it the whole thought process?
Yeah, like imagine you're showing your work in like math class, right?
Ah.
That's what it's like. You give it the problem, the solution, but also all those steps in between, all those because and therefore statements that we use when we explain our logic,
Right.
And here's the kicker. With these large language models, especially the ones with like hundreds of billions of parameters, it actually works.
What?
Yeah, it's wild.
So it's not even just about making AI bigger, it's about changing how it approaches problems. Okay, so what's the secret sauce here? Why does chain of thought prompting work so well?
Well, the research, it points to three main benefits. There's problem decomposition, transparency, and versatility.
Okay.
So take problem decomposition, for example. By prompting the AI to think step by step, it's almost like we're empowering it to tackle these super complex problems by breaking them down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Divide and conquer, right.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But what about this whole transparency thing? I mean, everyone always says AI is this big, mysterious black box.
And that's the beauty of this whole technique. It lets us peek inside that black box,
Yeah.
With each step laid out, we can actually trace the AI's thought process. We can see exactly how it arrives at a particular conclusion.
So no more AI pulling answers out of thin air.
Exactly. We can actually understand its logic.
And what was that third benefit again? Versatility?
Right. Chain of thought prompting. It's not a one-trick pony. It's not just limited to like one type of problem or domain. The research, it shows it's effective across a whole bunch of tasks.
Really?
Yeah, from solving those crazy math word problems to understanding the nuances of human language. Even things like writing poems or generating code. It's surprisingly versatile.
Okay, so you mentioned AI tackling math word problems.
Right.
Those were like impossible for me in school.
Yeah.
What kind of math are we even talking about here? Like, did chain of thought prompting actually help?
So they tested this on a benchmark. It's called GSM-8K.
Okay.
And basically it's a data set with like thousands of grade school level math word problems.
Wow.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is by using chain of thought prompting on a large language model, specifically Palm 540B, they got like state-of-the-art results.
State of the art. Wait, so it is beating out like other AI models that are specifically designed for math?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Like in some cases, it even did better than those specialized AI systems that are like solely trained on math reasoning.
That's wild.
It is, right?
So just by explaining its thinking, the AI basically became like a math whiz.
Pretty much, yeah.
What other problems did they test this on?
They also looked at common sense reasoning.
Common sense reasoning.
Yeah, which is honestly a really tricky one for AI.
Really?
Yeah, because it involves like understanding those everyday situations, things that we just kind of take for granted as humans.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so think about like understanding those implied relationships between events or interpreting like figurative language or even just knowing that like if you drop a glass, it's probably going to break.
Yeah.
These are things that aren't like directly stated,
Yeah.
They require an understanding of how the world works.
It's like teaching an AI to read between the lines,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. And the researchers found that chain of thought prompting, it really gave the AI a boost in these kinds of tasks too. Like they use something called the SEICAN data set.
SEICAN.
Yeah, it tests an AI's ability to like understand instructions and then actually interact with the physical world through a robot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So like it could understand a request like, hey, can you go grab me a bottle of water from the kitchen?
Right.
Even if like the bottle isn't, right out in the open, it has to actually like think about where it might be.
Yeah, exactly. And like what's even more interesting is that this whole ability to reason through those more complex situations, it doesn't really happen with smaller language models.
Really?
Yeah, it's like there's this threshold they cross once they hit a certain size and complexity.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, kind of like how our brains develop.
Yeah.
Like as they mature, they gain those more like sophisticated cognitive
That's it.
abilities.
So bigger is better in this case, at least when we're talking about, AI brains.
It seems that way, yeah. And it's a big deal because like we're not just talking about making AI a little bit better at certain things. We're talking about unlocking this whole new level of cognitive ability, one that's like way closer to how we reason and solve problems.
That is serious. But it makes you wonder, like, how does it actually work? Did the researchers figure out the why behind all of this? So we've talked about, like, what chain of thought prompting is and how well it works. But what about the why? Did the researchers figure out what's actually going on under the hood, like why this technique is so effective?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Hmm.
And honestly, there's no simple answer. But they did do some pretty cool experiments to try and figure out, like, the key mechanisms at play.
Oh, okay. Like what?
So one thing they did was something called ablation studies.
Ablation studies.
Yeah, basically it's like you take away different parts of the process one at a time
Hmm.
and see what happens, like which parts have the biggest impact.
Okay, so what'd they find?
Well, one of the big takeaways was that just giving the AI the equation to solve, that wasn't enough.
Right.
No, it wasn't about just feeding it raw data. It needed something more, something else.
Interesting. So it's not just about what you tell it, it's how you tell it, even for AI.
Yeah, exactly. Like the actual language, the words used in those reasoning steps,
Mm-hmm.
those turned out to be super important. It's like
Yeah.
the AI needs that narrative, those connections to really get it.
So it's like we're learning to speak AI's language in
Yeah.
a way.
Kind of, yeah. And they tested another thing too. They wondered, what if we just gave the AI more processing power, more compute? Like, would that be enough?
Hmm. Good question. I'm gonna guess probably not, because if the language, like the structure of the reasoning is so important, just adding more horsepower wouldn't necessarily change that.
You're exactly right. It wasn't about brute forcing the answer.
Uh-huh.
The AI needed those steps, that guidance, to actually solve the problem effectively.
That's pretty amazing, though. It's like we're like starting to crack the code of how these massive language models think and learn?
Totally. It's a super exciting area of research and like it has huge implications because we're not just building smarter AI, we're actually learning more about intelligence itself.
Wow. So, any final thoughts for our listeners who are probably just as fascinated by chain of thought prompting as we are? What should they take away from all of this?
I think the big takeaway here is that this isn't just some random technical trick. It's a totally different way of thinking about AI and what it can do, like how it can reason. And as we keep exploring this, who knows what we'll find? It's a really exciting time to be following this whole field, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And a huge thank you to our expert for breaking all of this down for us. And to everyone listening, keep those brains engaged, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.